Well folks, Lord of the Rings War of the Rohirrim hit theaters last weekend, here in the United States. And I'm recording this video around lunchtime on Monday. Now when it came to the box office for War of the Rohirrim, how much money was it going to make? In all honesty, I had no idea how it was going to do in theaters. As the marketing for the movie picked up and we saw that they were going to insert the modern day girl boss trope into the story of Helm Hammerhand, I looked and I saw some backlash to it. I did see a good amount of backlash to the changes that they were going to be making, but that backlash didn't seem like it was on the same level as, say, Rings of Power when marketing picked up for the first season for that show, that abomination of a show. So yeah, as the marketing for War of the Rohirrim picked up, I honestly had no idea how this movie was going to do in theaters. But now that we've passed its opening weekend, we finally have some box office numbers. I'm on Box Office Mojo and War of the Rohirrim opening weekend, worldwide only $10 million. $10.3 million is the number here. Now granted, this is a pretty even number right here, so I doubt that this is the exact number down to the dollar. And I did check the box office for this movie pretty early yesterday and I think it was the exact same number, so I don't know if it's updated for Sunday box office haul, but either way folks, $10 million, that is not a high number. Now this is an animated movie, so that might affect the movie's floor and the movie's ceiling in terms of how much money it can make, but $10 million, that is a low opening weekend no matter how you spin it. Now I've got a few reviews for the movie pulled up. I'm not going to read through all of them, I'll just give you some headlines, maybe a tidbit here or there. Salon, Lord of the Rings War of the Rohirrim is another barrel-scraping twist on Tolkien. The feature-length anime is a bold and admirable new direction for Lord of the Rings, but it's not enough to stand alone. Bold and admirable new direction. New direction. How about you just stick to what Tolkien wrote? I mean, Lord of the Rings has a huge fan base as is, so if you simply stick to what Tolkien wrote, you ought to have success. But they didn't do that with this movie. The Observer Lord of the Rings War of the Rohirrim review, a generic Hobbit-free Tolkien tale. This anime feature is mostly rote medieval fantasy that doesn't have the widespread appeal of Peter Jackson's trilogy. It's generic. Oof. The verse Lord of the Rings War of the Rohirrim is a soulless return to Middle-earth. Director Kenji Kamiyama's new Lord of the Rings anime film feels like what happens when you try to turn a footnote into a feature-length story. Coming soon.net Lord of the Rings War of the Rohirrim review, beautiful but predictable. And then I've got Polygon. I'll read a little bit of this review because there's one tidbit here that's kind of funny. War of the Rohirrim revives everything great about Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, plus one issue that's still annoying. What is that one issue that's still annoying, you might ask? Where Rohirrim fails regrettably is in repeating the mistakes of the Jackson trilogy. It's a movie where all the bad guys are darker skinned and darker haired than the good guys, and wear more raw animal materials, adapting with little change Tolkien's Orientalist world building. And the next paragraph it gets better. This might seem a small nitpick. I hear the cry, there are two Tolkien brown good guys, going up from apologists. But we live in an era in which right-wing billionaires unironically name their companies Sauron and Palantir, and both the Italian far-right and the post-liberal right Vice President-elect of the United States claim Lord of the Rings for their own. For every triumphant, nostalgic blare of the Howard Shore-inspired score in my theater, I felt an inaudible minor note. This story about a war that started when a good white father didn't want a bad brown man as his son-in-law is gonna be a softball pass to some of the worst parts of Tolkien fandom. Ladies and gentlemen, my IQ just dropped by about 50 points, but I'll just make this comment. No matter how much you update a story for modern audiences, it's never going to be good enough for the left. It's never going to be good enough for the woke crowd. Oh, there's also this comment from the review. The Vikings butt for horses vibe of the Riders of Rohan is apparent even from a brief look. The Rohirrim are based off of Old English. The Golden Hall is influenced by the Mead Hall in Beowulf. Theoden, Eomer, Eowyn, those are Old English names. Yeah, Rohan is not based on the Vikings. But the greater point here is that reviews for this movie, they're not all that great. Now I'll jump to Rotten Tomatoes. Professional critics 51%, that's not good. And that's saying something because professional critics tend to applaud any movie that's updated for modern audiences. Audience score 83%, so that's quite a bit higher. However, the bottom line, box office only $10 million opening weekend. So evidently not a lot of people saw this movie. I for one, I'm not seeing this movie. My general view is that if Hollywood is going to be updating a certain IP, a certain franchise for modern audiences, if they're going to be injecting modern messaging into it, if they're going to be putting modern tropes into it, I don't want to give them my money, and they did exactly that with War of the Rohirrim. They took Helm Hammerhand's story, they changed it. They came up with a fan fiction story about Helm Hammerhand's unnamed daughter who's only mentioned in, I don't know what, one sentence, two sentences in the appendices. And the reason they did that was to inject the modern day, strong female character, girl boss trope into the story. So yeah, I'll pass on that. And I know I'm not the only one who's not watching this movie. So Rotten Tomatoes here, it might look like the movie's being well received by audiences, but at the end of the day, it's not making a lot of money. Not a lot of people are seeing it. If more people saw this movie, this score would probably be lower. Now I'll give you just one more article here, and this is from comicbook.com. Lord of the Rings anime sets disappointing box office record for the franchise. The reason I want to bring this article up is because to this point I had not seen anything about what this movie's production budget was, but this movie has a reported budget of $30 million. That is a small budget. Just for context, your typical Disney movie, or at least a lot of Disney movies, they've had production budgets like $200, $250 million. This is only $30 million. Having a much smaller budget like that, this gives a movie a much greater chance of breaking even in theaters. When you try to calculate how much does a movie need to make to break even, a lot of people use a rule where movies gotta make 2.5 times whatever its production budget was in order to break even, because you got marketing budget, you got theaters keeping a percentage of the cut, and there are other formulas you can use to calculate that, but if I multiply 30 million times 2.5, that would come out to $75 million that this movie needs to break even. That's not a whole lot of money. However, from what we see of the box office return for its opening weekend, it's only brought in $10 million so far. $10 million internationally. And typically a movie makes the most money on its opening weekend. So this does not bode well for War of the Rohirrim. If it gets some good word of mouth, then it might have a chance of making more money, but if its box office haul drops with each passing weekend, then this movie's going to lose money. Now, why does this movie not seem to be doing so well? I think there's a few possible reasons. It is an animated movie, so that might affect the movie's floor and its ceiling when it comes to how much money it could make. Another factor here, if you look down here, widest release, 2,600 theaters. I guess that's the amount of theaters it's playing in. Now if I jump to Moana 2, which is at $700 million, over $700 million, it says widest release here, 4,200 theaters. So I guess War of the Rohirrim's not playing in as many theaters. So yeah, that's going to have an impact on how much money it'll make. And then the other possible factor I think is, some people looked at this movie, they were expecting a story of Helm Hammerhand, and instead they're getting an updated for modern audience fan fiction. And they decided, nah, I don't want to see that. I know I'm one of those people. So yeah, I'll keep an eye on how this movie's doing. Looks like its production budget is small, but it's not making a lot of money in theaters so far, so even with a real small budget, it, at least so far, doesn't look like it's going to turn a profit. Goodbye everyone.